know who should be the next Joe Bonansinga Community Service Award winner. United Way of Adams County and the Rotary Club of Quincy are looking for them right now. The award began back in 1998 to honor someone who embodies the highest standards of community service. The award was named after the first recipient, Joe Bonansinga, who was the first chairman to lead the United Way of Adams County's campaign over the $1 million mark. Natalie Cornwell with the United Way says Joe was the epitome of a leader.
This Community Service Award honors people who exemplify all of those qualities. What makes Quincy unique, what it needs to go forward, and the people that are part of Quincy and make it so special.
They will present the award on May 9th at the Rotary Club meeting. You can submit nominations now through the end of March. To find out how, just head over to WGEM.com.